Hey guys, Kyle Kulinski is letting us post some of the clips from his channel that we think you guys will really love in the Breaking Points community on our channel.
Yep, let's get to it.
Jerry Springer, had a very famous talk show. It's going off the air after being on air for a very, very long time. He did an interview with Dino Badala on his SiriusXM radio show. And, Springer was asked some political questions. I don't know how much of a political guy he is. Maybe he's dabbled in it every now and then. But he was asked about the rise of Trump. It's an interesting question. And Jerry Springer's answer, it's a very interesting response too. So I'll have you take a look at it, but you'll see Jerry Springer is basically trying to almost like blames himself and his show for the rise of Trump. Take a look.
Do you see a connection? Do you see a line between the success of the Jerry Springer show, which was everywhere? It defined, I think, a decade, to be blunt, and the way people look at TV and the way they let people get away with. Do you think that on some level, sincere? I'm being honest with you.
Yeah.
Oh, it was fine. Do you think it contributed to people accepting someone like Donald Trump?
Probably social media more, but yes, there's no question. The behavior of some of the people on the show is exactly Donald Trump. The point is, the reason there's more respect given to the people who were on my show is they have enough sense not to run for president. They're on the show letting their emotions out, their feelings out. They don't speak the Queen's English. They don't have money. They don't live in palaces. They aren't rich and famous. But they have feelings like everybody else. And when they get angry, they probably curse and they yell and sometimes fight because they don't have the skills to settle things in different ways. That's Trump. But what made Trump unique, the only thing that separates him from the guests on my show is the fact that he had this delusion of he knew how to run the world or run the country, when in fact, he knows nothing about how you run a country. And we paid the price for that. And but yeah, of course there's similarities, except for the issue of, I don't think I ought to be president.
That was an interesting back and forth to me. So the argument strikes me as this. My show helped to normalize degeneracy. And in that normalization of degeneracy, you get this candidate who's degenerate. And so that became not a negative thing in the eyes of the public. It became maybe even a positive thing. That, my show helped lowered the standards for the way people should act. And Trump came along and gave us a hefty dose of that, very similar type stuff to what you see on my show, and that led to his rise. Another way of putting it is like, Trump brought about the death of civility. My show helped bring about the death of civility, and Trump finalized the death of civility in our politics. And so he's trying to take ownership for Trump. Now, he also mentioned social media more has led to that as well. Social media is the place where everybody goes to be the worst version of themselves. You could argue that, or you could argue the most authentic version of themselves, the most shit-posty version of themselves, however you want to talk about it. So do I buy that argument? I actually don't. I don't buy that argument at all, because to me, to the extent you're going to make any kind of argument like that, the one that appeals more to me is the cult of celebrity argument. So he had a built-in advantage in running for president because he had been a celebrity for so long. And, in this country, whatever people want to pretend, there is a worship of celebrity. There is a worship of, faces and people that we all know to one extent or another based on whatever they do for a living that's in the public eye. And so I think he had a built-in advantage, even though he was kind of viewed as a joke, and, rightly so to some extent. I think the cult of celebrity angle is one of the reasons that, led to the rise of him and perhaps gave more of an advantage at the beginning than anybody may have thought he had. But to me, the main culprit, and you guys all know this, is the real reason for the rise of Trump is the total breakdown of trust in our institutions. And don't get me wrong, Trump was and is a total demagogue and a charlatan and a con man and a fraud. But I think people rightly looked at our institutions having failed them. And so then when you have somebody who comes along who postures as No, I'm the effective person. I'm the efficient person. Only I can fix it, and I'm looking out for you. He literally said that once, only I can fix it. I alone can fix it, something like that. And the posturing worked. You know, it was, do you really trust, like the media would go after Trump relentlessly, but his argument was so easy. It's like, you're going to trust these people? These guys? They've given you a million reasons not to trust them, so you should trust me over them. You know, the same people that brought you the Iraq war, you're going to trust them when they criticize me. And then he would posture like he was against the Iraq war, when of course he wasn't. He was tepidly for it. There's that clip on Howard Stern where he talks about it and tepidly comes out in favor of the war. But I think it's more of that. I think it's more of the media has been lying to you all this time. Obviously, the government has failed you a million ways, whether it be the Iraq war, the Afghanistan war, the trillions of dollars spent overseas for absolutely nothing, the subprime mortgage crisis and the Great Recession where people lost their homes and lost their livelihood, and wages had been stagnant and all the jobs are outsourced. And then you got this guy who comes along and postures against it. And also, by the way, he does the classic elitist trick of scapegoating. Don't look up. Don't look at, the billionaires and the corporations as to why you're hurting. Look at it's the Muslims. It's the Mexicans. And so, I mean, basically a huge number of the Republican voters all went for it, and he picked off enough independents to get the job done. And so I think that's what led to the rise of Trump. But I will also say, to Jerry Springer and his show, I don't know how much of it was planned and how much of it was, really authentic and people genuinely going through these problems and having all sorts of tumultuous issues. That's a hard word to say. But I think authenticity will beat inauthenticity every time. So that civility politics was going to go out one way or another, whether it was with Trump or even with Bernie. Like, it was going to go out one way or another, where you were going to get somebody who's more of a quote unquote straight shooter and straight talker than you were going to get, the button down politician who talks really fakely and has a weird rhythm and cadence to what they say. So I think that was going out either way. Either way, look, I actually think Jerry's being too hard on himself here. I don't think his show is led to the rise of Trump or helped facilitate Trump or lay the groundwork for Trump. To the extent you're going to point at any other individual figure in public life that did that, maybe Sarah Palin, because she was the precursor. It mirrored him in this sense. Like, Sarah Palin was a tribalist demagogue who's unintelligent, and I think you could argue Trump was a tribalist demagogue who's unintelligent. So there were that sort of connecting tissue, but I think Jerry's being a little too hard on himself here. The real culprit, you could argue to some extent, the cult of celebrity, but probably more importantly, the death and the total breakdown of trust in our institutions, which is merited. It's just that Trump obviously was not the solution. And in fact, the way he governed, you can all see, he was just a continuation of the status quo. He governed like George W. Bush. That's what he was, just a standard establishment Republican. And ultimately, final point, I know I'm going on and on here, but the culture war also helped maintain Trump because he was able to, take on the culture war fight in a way that other Republicans are not able to do it as effectively. And so that also helped get him the huge devoted following that he had and still has to some extent. So anyway, there you have it. Jerry, don't be so hard on yourself. I really don't think it's your fault.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.